Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump joins the Friday exodus to Long Island. Welcome to the Friday edition. With crime fighting on the agenda today, the president speaking to supporters later in Garden City, New York. I'm Joe Mathieu in New York alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, the president leaving the bubble not to talk about affordability today, but crime stats.
Yeah, of course, as always with President Trump, his remarks in Long Island could take any number of directions. But yes, he's going to be with law enforcement and first responders on the ground there for this speech, highlighting crime, as you say, even with other issues still simmering in the background, including the conflict with Iran, as the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is promising unprecedented economic isolation for Iran. Joe, he says, watch this space.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe we'll learn next week what he's got in mind with a combination, Kailey, of the blockade and economic pressure, knowing that we have had sanctions on Iran for some 47 years. And the impact that this whole war has had on energy prices is, of course, very important in a state like New York. We're above $4 a gallon nationally. Kailey, right here in the state of New York, it's averaging $4.14. You can probably find something more expensive in Garden City. And to your point, if he starts doing the weave, maybe we'll hear about all of these issues later today.
Well, and as we consider the price of gas and affordability challenges, it translates directly into the consumer sentiment figures that we got this morning. A deterioration in UMich consumer sentiment for both Democrats and Republicans. Interesting as we march toward the midterms with 82 days to go here. A decline in retail sales as well, even though gas does have a little bit to do with it. So we'll get into all of that this hour. But we begin first with how the markets are reacting to that data as we turn to New York, where you are, where Charlie Pellet also is. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Kailey Leinz. Indeed, the U.S. stock market looks like it's running out of gas today with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all in the red. We are, however, when you run the weekly numbers, on track for a weekly gain on the S&P of 0.3%. I'll have more on the markets for you coming up in just a moment. Developing story, though, headline right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service. The Justice Department and a U.S. financial regulator, the CFTC, are probing transactions around Radiant World, which is the private firm that has rapidly risen to become one of the world's largest iron ore traders. Again, developing story headline right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index all in the red right now. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares is higher. That index up by 0.3%. But putting it all in context, looking at a loss now of 0.2% on the S&P. We have got the Dow Industrials down 148, drop there of 0.3%. S&P at 77.79, pulling back from a record. NASDAQ 100 right now down 0.4%. 2-year 4.16%, the 10-year 4.69%, and the 30-year 5.26%. Gold up $33 the ounce, $43.83 on the ounce, with a gain for the precious metal of 0.8%. WTI, West Texas Intermediate crude up 1% ahead of the weekend. 82 even a barrel of Brent, 88.06, higher now by just about 1.1%. Again, recapping here, S&P down 19, drop there of 0.2%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, always an honor to watch Charlie Pellet work here at World Headquarters in New York. I now know exactly what it's like to be atop the Gilded Tower. Yes, we're in New York on Balance of Power for the Friday edition, and my partner Kailey Leinz is holding forth in the nation's capital. We'll have our panel with us this hour, of course, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, and so welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power. The threat from President Trump against Iran has been total obliteration unless they reopen the strait. That threat may be changing to economic isolation. That is the way forward, it seems, for the administration. And based on analysis that we have seen from Bloomberg Economics, it could be easier said than done. The Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent laying out the 1-2 punch threat today in an interview on Newsmax. Listen.
Watch this space for more announcements coming next week, because we are going to apply measures like have never been seen in the history of economic isolation on a country. So it will be a combination of economic isolation like the world has never seen before, and the continued blockade in the Strait of Hormuz that will keep anything from going in or out of the Iranian ports.
So let's get more on what exactly it is that we could see that the world has not yet seen as we turn to Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg Washington correspondent, who is live on the North Lawn of the White House. As Joe has mentioned, Tyler, Iran has already been under sanction by the United States and others for decades, 47 years. How much further can the U.S. push things?
Right, and to put even a finer point on that, Kailey, data cited by Bloomberg News shows that nearly 2,200 new sanctions have been applied between now and 2018, underscoring that Iran's economy really has weathered waves of sanctions, though the economy has been severely hit. The IMF said in April that they're expecting Iran's economy to shrink this year by 6.1%. And according to central bank data, inflation on a year-over-year basis is reaching 77% at the moment. The administration is making it very clear that they are opting against expanding military operations for a number of different factors that we know about. As Joe mentioned, our own reporting from Bloomberg Economics when it comes to ideas that our stockpiles need to be replenished. But they're opting for this economic stronghold in a sense. But we have to keep in mind that the U.S. had given financial relief to the country earlier this year amid the negotiations, and it wasn't enough to keep that ceasefire in place. We'll have to see where it goes from here. Kailey, one of the ideas floated is perhaps the U.S. could further target Chinese refiners who are importing Iranian crude, but that, of course, has its own array of risks when it comes to the Beijing-Washington trade truce just ahead of the Chinese president coming here to the U.S. in about a month's time.
Well, you just put your finger on it, Tyler. I mean, that is what would make a difference, right? If we start sanctioning or tariffing, I should use the word, oil exports to China, that would essentially render Iran out of business. That's not something the White House is considering, is it?
Well, we had heard this previously threatened by the administration. It's something that's been threatened in other conflicts as well, Joe, including when it comes to Russia and China being a big benefactor there. We know that the majority of sanctioned Iranian crude ends up going to these Chinese teapot refiners. Yep. We'll see where it ultimately goes from here. I brought up that backdrop that we have to keep in mind, which is that the Chinese president is going to be here in Washington in just a few weeks' time. But last night we also saw the U.S. move to impose these new sanctions these new tariffs, of up to 100% for certain drones, which didn't explicitly mention China in that announcement. But if you read through the details, it became pretty evident that this was over the U.S.'s national security concerns and considered to be a move against China. And Joe actually follows what has been a recent series of moves, including from the FCC to block certain Chinese tech exports. So we'll have to see where it goes from here and whether the administration is willing to go that far.
Tyler, we're keeping an eye on Joint Base Andrews as the president is on board Marine One, getting set to land at Joint Base Andrews. Well, of course, he'll board Air Force One, which is going to take him to Garden City. He's heading to Long Island to talk about crime. And as we watch here to see if he might have some words with reporters before boarding the new aircraft, why bring this message there now?
Well, Kailey, he's going to be in front of, I think it's safe to say, a relatively friendly crowd, of course, at the president's events. He's going to be speaking to the Nassau County Police Academy in Long Island. The White House says to expect him to release new FBI crime statistics showing a decrease in violent crime in 2025. This is an area that the GOP has typically pulled better on compared to Democrats. It's very clear that Republicans are trying to figure out how to hone their messaging as we get closer to November and the midterms, and the polling shows us that they're playing defense when it comes to the economy, an area where the party has historically pulled better on compared to Democrats. We'll see, though, if the economy does come up. We had heard from one of the president's close advisors, the NEC director, Kevin Hassett, earlier this week, saying to expect Republicans to keep rolling out ideas related to the economy, including tax cuts as we get closer to Election Day, even if it means that they won't be enacted until after Election Day, depending on what happens with control of Congress. So something to watch here for sure, but definitely an area that the administration is probably going to start highlighting even more as we get closer and closer to November.
Tyler Kendall, Bloomberg Washington correspondent, live at the White House. We thank you so much, Tyler, as the president makes his way to southern Nassau County. Yes, Garden City, New York is where the president will be holding forth. That's producer James country, and he's going to be surrounded by first responders in an area, as Tyler said, that is quite friendly to President Trump. Remember, he went to the Nassau Coliseum. This was back in September 24. As many at the time, Kailey, were asking, well, why is he going to Long Island now instead of a swing state. Here was his message that day.
I will cut taxes for families, small businesses, and workers, including restoring the SALT deduction, saving thousands of dollars for residents of New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and other high-cost states. I will deliver the greatest economy in the history of the world to our country, and one of the greatest economies in the history of New York State.
And we fast forward to this 14th of August, 2026, back in Long Island with our panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Rick is a partner at Stonecourt Capital, Republican strategist. Jeanne, our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Jeanne, you're our New Yorker, so I'm going to start with you here. You've been to Long Island and Nassau County, and even more specifically, I'm going to bet to Garden City, realizing that Long Island is not a monolith, but the president is probably going to have a very good time there when he faces the crowd this afternoon. Why does he go to a friendly location when he could be changing minds and speaking to affordability around the country?
Yeah, you know, as you said, producer James country. So we love it. And of course, it is also the home, in addition to producer James, it is also the home of the Nassau County executive, who is currently running for governor of New York. And even though Donald Trump lives in Florida now, he is a New Yorker at heart. God bless him. And he really does care about what happens to the future of this state. So Bruce Blakeman, this is also to support him. But, you know, I think what the president is trying to do in talking about crime today, if he stays on message, is trying to turn the page from a very unpopular economy right now. And that is the problem. Usually Donald Trump would turn to immigration or the economy, but he's underwater on both of those things right now. So he's going to the third choice, which is crime. Unfortunately for the president, it is very, very hard to turn the page on the economy, because whether people are Republican or Democrat, as we saw in Rick's favorite consumer sentiment from UMass today, the numbers are way down amongst Republicans, Democrats, and independents. People do not feel good about the economy today.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jeanne, because you're exactly right. In July, just a month ago, Republican sentiment was at 88.2. Fast forward to this preliminary August read, it's down to 78.7, a 9.5 point drop. You saw deterioration, less so, though, for independents, down 3 points for Democrats as well. That's probably not a trend you want to see as we're getting closer to the midterms. Rick, could the president try to course correct, at least in some way, in his remarks in Long Island this afternoon?
Well, I'm a cynic. You know, I think he wants to play golf this weekend. So it's like, where's the friendliest crowd I can go to before I head to the golf course?
Well, the crowd he's going to right now, Rick, sorry to interrupt you, appears to be reporters who are gathered beneath the wing of Air Force One. He's showing them a piece of paper. And if we can get our ears on that, it'll be interesting to see what exactly it is that he felt was so important. He had to go talk to them about it before he boards the aircraft. Let's listen now live to President Trump. And we maybe can't hear him that well, Joe.
Yeah, I'm not hearing him either, but I want to see what's on this piece of paper. We got to zoom in on this. James, talking with folks who were waiting to greet him on the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews on his way to Long Island. He's been known to pull out the blueprints for any project he's working on, and this appears to be prescription drug prices, which brings us straight back to the affordability issue. Kailey, maybe this is something he plans to incorporate into the speech today. Looks like we don't have good audio on this, unfortunately. We'll have to play this back and get a better sense of what he said. We should note, though, that Caroline Leavitt is with him, Kailey, and maybe one of her final trips with the President of the United States.
She's just got a few weeks left as she's set to depart at the end of the month. As Joe says, unfortunately, we can't hear the president well right now, but fortunately for us, we can't hear the thoughts of Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino. Rick, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Please continue what you were saying.
Well, notwithstanding the mimeograph that he's sporting around in front of the press right now, you know, I don't think this would be considered a really significant event when it comes to trying to change the tide of the midterm elections less than 80 days away. Look, it's the dead of August. Nobody is paying much attention to this. Smart people are at a beach trying to beat the heat. And the president's probably going to be playing golf this weekend. So we've sandwiched this into the agenda to give him something to talk about, to try and, like cap the weekend, maybe drive the Sunday shows. But I don't think anybody thinks it's going to take away from the really bad news that you pointed out, Kailey, about the consumer sentiment, the retail sales, the deficit numbers going up. There's been a whole raft of big glaring issues, including the prices of the 30-year bond. There are real trouble signs in this economy, and he wants to talk about the golden age. He is so off message. He's going to have to retreat on this if he expects to win Republican seats back in Congress.
He's getting on the airplane right now, Jeanne, making his way up the stairs. I guess whatever presentation that was a pretty brief one. He's still got that piece of paper in his hand that apparently has to do with prescription drug prices sinking on behalf of the administration's efforts. As he gets out to Long Island, this would be a pretty quick trip. I think he was scheduled to speak around 3 p.m., I guess presumably to Rick's point, before a golf game. What's the best case scenario here? You get some group photos with first responders that you can use later on in the midterm campaign, or is this really just an excuse to golf?
Best case scenario for his campaign team is that he stays on message. He talks about crime numbers. He talks about, as he's trying to do there, it looks like prescription drug prices, and he talks about what he's going to do about the economy. However, last time he went out to a rally, he said things like, we may need to send oil prices higher amid the war in Iran. I mean, just blatantly taking credit for higher oil prices. He's got a Treasury Secretary, and I heard Mike McGee mention this earlier on your show, saying there's no such thing as a K-shaped economy. That's over. That's done with. We're in a C-shaped economy. And, to add to the litany that Rick just gave, today is the birthday of Social Security. It is 91 years old today. 91 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt signed it into law. It is going to run dry. By the time I need it, Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz, it's going to run dry unless Congress does something about it. Why not have the president talking about that, what he's going to do about that? I mean, I wish Democrats would as well. So there's a lot to talk about, but I'm not feeling confident he's going to stay on message. And he probably does want to get to the golf course, and I can't deny him that.
Well, Rick, if you want to keep funding Social Security, at least right now, you have to keep borrowing and issuing new debt. We've seen some big figures on the auctions this week. The 30-year auction yesterday was at the highest yield since 2001. This isn't a sustainable trajectory.
No, it's not. And everybody in Congress knows it. There's been no effort to try and rein in federal spending. Now we're seeing the results of that with these high bond yields. And a lot of bankers are starting to say, stay away from bonds with this kind of deficit, 40 trillion and more this year alone. Excuse me. I can't swallow the amount of debt that the federal government is producing these days. It's a real troubling signs. And, there are a lot of things that we know. And one of the things we know the best is the debt market tends to send a signal to the White House, and they need to start listening to that signal.
All right, Rick Davis, we appreciate you trying your best. And Jeanne, Sheehan, Zaino, thank you both so much, our political panel on this Friday edition of Balance of Power. And we'll have more coming up live from both Washington and New York today. Tom Kloza, Chief Energy Advisor to Gulf Oil, is straight ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. We are seeing a gain in the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, up right now by 0.4%. To be sure, we're on track for another weekly gain. That would make it 3 in a row in the S&P 500 index on the week, up by 0.3%. But Wall Street's wrapping up the week. Stocks are falling, signs of a slowdown in the main engine of the economy, reinforcing bets that the Fed will hold rates steady to prevent further weakness. S&P down 18 right now. Drop there of 0.2%. Dow Industrials down 112, a decline there of 0.2%. Nasdaq right now down 0.4%. And again, the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up by about 0.4%. The 2-year, 4.16%. The 10-year currently yielding 4.69%. We've got the 30-year, 5.26%. Spot gold up $31 the ounce, higher by 0.7%, 43.81 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude ahead of the weekend and ahead of Tom Kloza. Right now, higher by 1.2%, 82.23 a barrel on WTI. Barrel of Brent, 88.26 right now. Brent, the global benchmark, up by about 1.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that, my friends, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I appreciate that, Charlie. Great to see you. And he'll be back coming up in about 20 minutes with another read here on the Friday trade. You heard Charlie say it. We've got a couple of important numbers before we talk to Tom Kloza. WTI, West Texas Intermediate crude, is above $82 a barrel. It's up a little more than 1% right now. So is Brent. $4.07, the national average for gas. And if we've learned anything from Tom Kloza, it's not crude oil that is the story right now. It's the distillates. Gasoline at $4.07 in New York, where the president is today, $4.14. A gallon of diesel, Kailey Leinz, $5.42. And as we know, the economy runs on diesel.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And if you want diesel, you need refiners. And that really is where the kink in the chain seems to be right now, as Tom Kloza has warned us before and very well may warn us again as he's joining us once again on Balance of Power. He's a chief energy advisor to Gulf Oil and is back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Tom, it's good to see you as always. That was the message you brought last time we spoke, that you have to watch diesel and that there could be even more pain there coming. Is that still the case? Seems like Tom may be having a little bit of difficulty hearing us. Of course, Joe, as we consider the picture for diesel and where that refining capacity is and is not, one of the big challenges is Russia, because Ukrainian drone strikes have been targeting Russian refineries. And add on another layer to this as we consider potentially sanctions that could go on Russia or secondary tariffs on buyers of Russian oil if the sanctions bill passed by the Senate goes through. And then the U.S. potentially could be intensifying sanctions or putting in secondary sanctions against Iranian oil if that is what is entailed in the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's promise of further economic isolation for Iran.
I think Tom Kloza can hear us now, if that's right, James, chief energy advisor for Gulf Oil. It's great to have you back, Tom Kloza. We've been learning lessons from you as we speak here. I don't know if you could hear our conversation earlier, but when you've got gasoline above $4 a gallon still, and you're looking at $5.42 for diesel, I know you've pointed us to the distilled products here. Pay less attention to the crude. This isn't going to change, even if the price of crude starts to come down, when you consider refining bottlenecks, right? How worried are you?
Yeah, I don't think it changes. And, you know, one thing that's been missed is that we're down about 7 to 8 million barrels a day of refining capacity, much of which was knocked out by drones. And that means less demand for crude. So, yeah, crude oil prices are in the 80s, but guess what? The price of diesel is about $180 in every corner of the country without taxes. You know, we are looking at the most expensive harvest season. You know, I live in New Jersey, so we don't harvest much of anything. But, you know, the rest of the country, you're looking at prices that have never been this high ever.
Well, So if they've never been this high ever, and we're considering the trajectory of where things will go, a lot of that may very well be dependent on crude influencing the price of product. And that brings us to the Middle East, Tom. If we consider the U.S.'s promise via the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to unleash a new campaign of unprecedented economic isolation against Iran, do you interpret that to mean potentially putting secondary sanctions on buyers of Iranian crude? What would that mean for global energy markets?
Well, I think it certainly means we're not going to have full and unfettered access to crude oil, whether it comes from the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea or comes from the Caspian or Russia. You know, the crude oil flows are going to be suppressed. But like I said, if you've got 7 or 8 million barrels a day of global refining that's down, and in some cases it's going to be down into 2027, you don't have as much demand for crude oil. So I really think the refined products, and particularly the diesel side of it, America goes crazy about gasoline prices, but diesel is really the world product. It's the one that you use 30 million barrels a day or so globally versus about 26 for gasoline. I did a piece this morning looking at hurricane season, and I got to tell you, it's very, very frightening. All we need is any sort of probability cone in the Gulf of Mexico, and we go apocalyptic again.
Man, that's a nightmare scenario. Tom, it does appear that this administration is bracing for a longer conflict than it was originally bargaining for. And we've had a lot of experts tell us here on Bloomberg TV and radio that it is very likely this will still be underway in some form when voters go to the polls in November and maybe as we walk into the winter. And I'm wondering what all of that would mean for heating oil for those in the Northeast and other areas who are going to be looking to fill up their tanks in a couple months.
Right now, you're looking at heating oil prices that are probably be above $5 a gallon. Wow. And you could get into crazy, insane numbers like $6 or $7 should there be a hurricane, or should if Russia has to import some diesel. They've been exporters of diesel to the tune of about 800,000 barrels a day in past years. So it's a significant crisis, and it's not just agriculture and it's not just heating oil. You think about everything that moves across the country, it moves basically by virtue of diesel or marine diesel in some cases. So it's a problem. The jet fuel shortage or the jet fuel disruption that we had earlier in the year is gone. That's the good news. The bad news is, in order to ramp up jet fuel production, they had to borrow a little bit from diesel production, and that's the problem for the last 125 days of the year.
Well, so is the only solution to this in the near term demand destruction? At what level is that brought, Tom?
Well, I think, you're seeing demand destruction in the terms of refineries. Refiners can buy. If they're going to sell something for $180 or $130, there's no risk in buying. So there's no demand destruction there. It's just the inability to ramp up production that's been lost. I do think we'll see demand destruction in the middle of the barrel to a certain extent. We'll have to see how the harvest season goes. We've never had, we had a planting season back in 2022 where you saw sky-high diesel prices. We've never seen it for the harvest season, and that largely takes over, the middle of the country in the next 90 days.
Always great to meet Tom Kloza in the middle of the barrel, Chief Energy Advisor at Gulf Oil. Tom, thank you. Great to see you. I hope you have a good weekend. As we turn to a breaking news story we touched on a bit earlier, Kailey, Luigi Mangione pleading guilty to federal stalking charges, of course, going back to the United Health Brian Thompson case from December of 2024. Pleading guilty means he did not make a plea deal in this particular case. And June Grasso from Bloomberg Law joins us right now here on Bloomberg TV and radio. They're going for life in this case?
That's what federal prosecutors say. And that's why this seems so stunning, because usually when a defendant pleads before trial, it's a plea deal, as you said. There's no plea deal here. And the judge emphasized that in court. I can sentence you. You can be sentenced to life in prison. She did ask what the range, the sentencing guidelines range were, and the prosecutor said 24 to 36 years. So look at it, 24 is probably the minimum that he would get. So they're just taking a chance that this judge is not going to sentence him to life in prison, and that they can get rid of the state prosecution by making a motion, which they've already made, that this is double jeopardy. And New York state laws we discussed before is very much favorable to a defendant in a case like this. If the act is from the same circumstance, it then should be double jeopardy. But it's a gamble. I've talked to a lot of people, and they said this is it's a risk because you never know what's going to happen in a court. So I guess the evidence it is overwhelming from what they've said. I mean, everything, video, fingerprints, DNA, the murder weapon, the manifesto. I mean, they had everything. So you can see why maybe they did it, but it's a risk.
Yeah, well, and as you speak to the question of double jeopardy and the state murder charges, they weren't just stalking charges like was the case in the federal case. Is it likely that his sentencing, if he does get a life sentence, say, in the federal case, might shape the decision-making in the state case?
Well, I don't know. The Manhattan DA is pretty adamant that they are going to try this case. They are really upset, you might say, that the federal government went ahead with the deal beforehand. I mean, they were, let's face it, they were not happy that the federal government even brought charges here. This is a typical state case. It's a murder in Manhattan and, arrested in Pennsylvania, perhaps, but New York City police then took charge of it, the prosecutors, and often there's this thing where, the state does all the work and then the feds come in. So that the Manhattan DA is not happy about this and was not happy about it from the very beginning, the feds coming in and trying to take over. So I think they're going to try their best to try the case, but, he's admitted to all these facts in federal court already. He said that he stalked Brian Thompson and shot him and that he knew what he was doing and he had the intent to do it. So one wonders if a judge is really going to allow this to go forward in state court. And the really good defense attorneys here, very well known and really good. So they must feel pretty confident about what they have to argue about, double jeopardy.
Do we have a sense of if that, in fact, did go to trial, what type of evidence we would see?
Yes. Apparently, they have video from when he came to New York and stalking Brian Thompson. They have video of the shooting.
Long before that day.
They have the murder weapon and they have his prints. They have DNA at the scene. They have his manifesto that he wrote saying he wanted to kill someone. Now they have his statement in federal court saying that why he did this. He was in back pain for years and he heard that there was going to be this conference and he researched it. So they have a lot of evidence, and that's probably why the defense decided to take this gamble.
Yep. All of 28 years old. He's pretty remarkable. June, you've been great on this, and thank you for jumping in today. June Grasso is the host of the great program Bloomberg Law on Bloomberg Radio, which you will want to hear today for good reason. I'm Joe Mathieu in New York at world headquarters here at Bloomberg. Kailey Leinz is in our nation's capital, in our Washington, D.C. bureau. And Kailey will spend some time with David Westin coming up and General Mark Kimmitt as we keep our eyes on what's happening in Iran. Stay with us here on Bloomberg
That's
TV
up next.
and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg with the Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq. They're all advancing, all declining. It is the Russell 2000 index that is advancing now, up by about 0.4%. Looking at a loss on the S&P 500 index. Stocks are falling. Signs of a slowdown in the main engine of the U.S. economy. Reinforcing bets of the Fed is going to hold rates steady to prevent further weakness. The S&P down 22 now, 77.76 where we stand, down by about 0.3%. Dow Industrials also down 0.3%. Nasdaq down 0.5. As I mentioned, the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up by 0.4%. The 2-year currently yielding 4.16%. The 10-year 4.69%. As of now, we are on track for a winning week for the U.S. stock market. That would be 3 in a row. Spot gold up 0.7% to $43.80 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude $82.15 a barrel, now up by 1.1%. Reddit shares are surging today. It'll be joining the S&P 500 next week. Reddit shares advancing now by 11%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet watching the markets for us. Thank you so much. And as for what we all should be watching, the Treasury Secretary of the U.S., Scott Bessent, says to watch this space for updates next week, potentially, on the United States' so-called unprecedented economic isolation plan for Iran. It seems the administration is looking to pivot to economic pressure rather than pursuing continued military and kinetic options. And perhaps, Joe, it's a blueprint that they're looking at as well in another theater when it comes to Cuba after, of course, a lot of buzz, especially after the Venezuela operation to start this year, that the U.S. perhaps was going to be considering a military option to overturn the communist dictatorship in Cuba. Our colleague Eric Martin is now reporting that no, in fact, what they are looking to do is economic pressure and ramping up of sanctions.
Using the same playbook in the Caribbean here, Kailey, and Eric is one of the best at this, and it's a really fascinating story. The Trump administration's strategy when it comes to Cuba hasn't been producing a lot of results. The government has rejected U.S. calls for change. So yes, economic pressure, cutting off all forms of revenue. And by the way, there aren't many left. We talk frequently, Kailey, about the fact that they're enduring blackouts and quite a bit of chaos on the ground on the island. But the idea of troops landing there in some sort of Venezuela-esque operation seems to be off the table for now. And I'll tell you, our colleague David Westin, who's with me here at World Headquarters, you sit in this chair long enough, you meet all the celebrities, Kailey. He's actually seizing on this issue on this week's edition of Bloomberg Wall Street Week. David Westin, investors' hopes for Cuba's economy. What is there to hope for right now?
Yeah, Joe, I think if you stay here long enough, you will actually find a celebrity. Come on.
You would know.
And we miss you, Kailey, but we're happy to have Joe here. So, yeah, I mean, it's nice to talk about economic sanctions, but it didn't work so well in Iran. It's been going on for quite a while. Didn't work so well in North Korea. Venezuela, as you point out, was not economic sanctions.
Yeah.
That was good old-fashioned military might. So we'll see what happens in Cuba. But what we did is we took a look at Cuba. We certainly considered what the various options are. We have an expert from University College London that goes through 4 different options, one of which is military, one of which is increased sanctions. But the main question we were asking is, what happens afterwards? There will be an afterwards. What are the possibilities for investment? Particularly, there are a lot of Cuban Americans, as you know, who are eager to go back in there. And so we talked, among other things, with an investor named Andro Nodarce Leon. He has invested a lot in real estate, particularly resort real estate, including in Puerto Rico. He's eager to get back in to his native country, and this is part of what he had to say.
The offering of services in Cuba is obviously significantly limited by how broken that economy is. And so for many years now, the tourism market in Cuba was not a market that had, 5-star, properties. I mean, upper upscale luxury was not really something that you saw in a significant way in Cuba. It was a lower rated market. The good thing is that there is a significant amount of existing properties there, existing assets, and existing infrastructure within the tourism industry. I think it requires firms like ours going and acquiring those properties, reinvesting and reimagining and upgrading those properties, and also bringing the operating conditions of those properties to a world-class scale. And so that's the lens through which we're looking at investing in Cuba. Surely there will also be the development of brand new resorts. I think there will be an opportunity for the development of branded residential product, right, which often is joined together with resorts or other types of hospitality properties. And so we think the future is very bright in that sector, without a doubt, and it's a very important pillar of the economic recovery of the island.
So again, that's Andrew Nodarce Leon, who is an investor in real estate, particularly in resorts. And we talked to various people, all of whom seem to agree on one thing. There are some economic reforms that are being undertaken even as we speak in response to the sanctions. Nobody seems to believe that's going to work. People are very skeptical about that will fundamentally change things. They seem to, certainly Mr. Nodarce Leon said, it's got to be a fundamental political change to really give investors the assurance that they would need that they can put their money in and get their money back out again. So we'll see, but there's a lot of appetite. People really want to go back in when they get the chance.
Well, and it's interesting, as I heard what he told you, David, I would imagine, frankly, that President Trump, a real estate guy at heart, is viewing it through a somewhat similar lens.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. And listen, I don't know real estate that well at all. I have been to Havana a couple of times on news trips, actually, back at ABC News, and it could be beautiful. I mean, it's really pretty. And there's a lot of culture there, beautiful oceans and beautiful beaches and things. So I can easily imagine, even as not a real real estate guy, some really nice resorts along the beach there.
Now, I was lucky to go to Cuba on a trip for the dedication of the Hemingway House back when relations were starting to thaw. You could get on a JetBlue in Florida and fly to Cuba, David. That would also need to be part of this, right? To actually be able to get people there.
Well, absolutely. It has to be fundamental changes. It's got to come from the United States. I mean, we got to let people in. There's got to be a change out there. But I bet you went to the bar, right? The Hemingway bar. Of
course I did.
Where you go over there. Exactly. It is. I think it's a really cool place.
It's an incredibly special place. I'm sure the cars will still be there. But you do
Wonderful
wonder
cars
what
from
the
the
poor
50s.
people of Cuba are going to go through between now and then.
And that's part of when you talk about these unprecedented economic sanctions, as I say, it hasn't worked that often in my experience around the world. But the way it works is by hurting the people. And the people putting pressure on the regime, which is what we were told in reporting out this story. And so that you really have to worry about. You're really getting at the regime through the people, and there's a lot of pain that has to be inflicted, I fear, before there's really change.
All right. Well, it should be a great episode of Wall Street Week tonight, which you can find, as always, at 6 p.m. Eastern time here on Bloomberg TV and radio. David Westin, thank you so much. David, with Joe in New York, they've both been to Havana. I'm still here in D.C. I got to get my act together, get out in the world a little bit. But fascinating to have this conversation around economic pressure on Cuba, perhaps being the option the administration resorts to rather than something kinetic. As we've told you, it does seem increasingly like that's the direction they're leaning when it comes to Iran as well. The Treasury Secretary saying that a period of economic isolation is coming for Iran on an unprecedented level. And as we consider what that may mean for the military options that the U.S. Finds itself with or without, we turn now to retired General Mark Kimmitt, who is back with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. He, of course, is former Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. General, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thanks.
As we hear this kind of rhetoric from the administration, and we've heard similar things from President Trump as well, who just within the last week has suggested low-keying it, focusing more on economic measures, is it because our military measures were not and cannot be enough?
I think that's true. It's really got to be a combination of economic, diplomatic, and military. I don't think you can do any of those in isolation. Right now, the military doesn't seem to be able to break through the resistance model of patience and standing back and taking the blows as Iran has been doing. So I think what they're doing is turning up the knob on the economic sanctions, turning down the knob on the military a little bit, while still trying to work the diplomatic simultaneously.
Is it turning down the knob on the military because we have to? You've seen the reporting, I'm sure, just as I have, that we're running low on munitions, both air defenses and precision munitions.
Well, it's that, but I also think it shows yet again the fallacy of winning a war through air campaigns alone. There hasn't been an air campaign that's won a war since the airplane has come into the air.
Well, with all of that said, General, and it's great to have you back with us today on Bloomberg, what should people be preparing for then? We've had 47 years of economic strangulation in Iran that has not broken the back of the regime. What actually changes behavior here?
Yeah, well, that's the right question to ask. You've got to understand with the Iranians, they follow what people would call the Middle East model, which is they're not trying to win, they're trying to not lose. And they win by not losing. It's a resistance model. They resist and they show patience. You never hear them say we're going to defeat the Americans. You hear them say we will resist, which means that they will take a lot of pain. They're like Rocky. As long as they get through the 15th round and they haven't been knocked out, they think they've won. We've seen that with Hezbollah. We've seen that with Hamas. That is the typical way they fight. And us trying to fight it in a conventional manner, not recognizing that patience is required, I think we forget how we became a country, which is the Revolutionary War. We outlasted the British, and they just finally got tired and went home.
Well, that also required an uprising, and I wonder if that is in the offing here. Is that the strategy, General, that you make conditions so painful on the ground in Iran? It's not just the regime, it's the people who can't take it anymore, and they go into the streets and rise up against leadership.
Well, they've tried that a couple of times, and they have among the most brutal regimes of all It's a theocratic fascist regime that anytime you have any type of resistance, any type of protest, they will just gun you down in the streets.
Wow.
Well, it's horrible to consider. And as Joe raises the prospect of not being able to take anymore, of people reaching their limits, we've seen reporting as well that sailors aboard the USS Lincoln perhaps are reaching their own limits as they are dealing with an extended deployment. They've been aboard since November. We're more than 260 days in, and it does seem relief is coming. They're sending the George Washington in to get those troops home. Yet their families had to go to the press to raise concern about these conditions. And the president was actually asked about those stories as he boarded Air Force One earlier this afternoon. Listen to his response.
Family members of U.S. service members are concerned about the conditions on board the USS Lincoln.
Well, no, that ship is moving. No, they're not. That ship is moving right now, or very shortly, and it's being replaced with another very similar ship.
Has the deployment's gone on too long? Are you worried?
No. Not nearly long enough. Thank you, everybody.
So if it was difficult to hear the questions of the reporter for our radio audience, he was asked whether or not they were concerned. He said, no, they're not. He was asked whether their deployment has been too long. He says, not nearly long enough. Is that the proper messaging from the commander-in-chief?
I probably would have used different words, but I think one must understand with the Navy, it's about expectations. These kids and their families plan their entire lives around a 6 to 7 month rotation. Everything down to and including having a family.
I know this. I'm a Navy kid.
Yeah, exactly. And so if the expectation is that you're going to be out there for 6 to 7 months and then you're going to go back and see your family, and now it gets extended 8, 9, 10 months, and you're on the high seas, it is not... it's not unexpected why those sailors are feeling the way they do. A small number, we hope, but nonetheless enough that it's a concern. This isn't like in Iraq in 2004 when we had to extend some of our troop units indefinitely. When soldiers go off to war, Marines go off to war, it's kind of for the duration as long as the war fight goes on. But the Navy is very, very systematic about the rotations. If for no other reason, it's a supply chain issue. One that's waiting is in dry dock getting fixed.
Okay, so if it really is ultimately about expectations, for those who are getting set to board the George Washington and deploy to the Middle East, what would their expectation be of how long they will be there and what it is they can anticipate they will be engaged in?
Well, I think the more important question is, has their leadership managed those expectations? Have they been talking to the family? Have they been talking to the sailors and saying, we hope this is only 6 to 7 months, but as you prepared for this cruise, have you prepared your family for it going a little bit longer than previously?
Well, do you think the leadership has enough information to be able to properly manage expectations at this point? Does the United States really know how long we're going to be at this?
No, and that's what you've got to be honest, and you've got to tell your families that. You've got to prepare. You're going to say, look, we're going to do the best we can. We can't guarantee this is only going to be 6 to 7 months, but that's the nation's duty.
All right, General, thank you so much. We appreciate your input on this. The former Brigadier General, retired Brigadier General, always a General, Mark Kimmitt, here with us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. He's with me here in Washington. Joe Mathieu is in New York. And Joe, I'll see you for the later edition at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Yes, indeed. 5 p.m. only here. Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.